The key would not turn. Cold air pressed against my back like a warning, and the bouquet in my hand sagged, petals bruised from a night spent on a car seat. 12 hours earlier, I watched my husband's breath disappear in a sterile room. Now, through a slit in the curtains I did not buy, I saw my mother-in-law sipping tea from our wedding china and my sister-in-law folding blankets over my reading chair. They had changed the locks, the linens, and in their minds, the story. They did not know about the paper I kept or the spine I had grown. The porch boards of the blue bungalow on Linden Rise remembered every weight I had ever carried: groceries, paint cans, a late autumn lemon tree that almost survived a northern winter, and me, this morning, heavier than grief and lighter than air. St. Gabriel's Hospital still clung to my clothes, that sterile mix of antiseptic and polite endings. I had slept 0 hours and cried far beyond that. The bouquet in my left hand smelled like regret. The overnight bag bit into my shoulder. The brass key we chose the week we moved in did not recognize me. It slid in, met resistance, and refused to turn. I tried the spare hidden behind the loose brick, the one Eli once called our secret checkpoint. The lock held its breath and stayed shut. I knocked. I listened. Silence answered, then a whisper of movement, then laughter that was not mine. I backed away from the door and found a sliver of window where sunlight bounced off glass and gave me a narrow view. The white linen curtains I hemmed last spring were gone, replaced by velvet panels the color of bruised fruit. Boxes towered where a clear path used to be. A pink pillow sat on my ink-blue reading chair like an unwelcome guest. On the coffee table, a floral teacup rested on the coaster Eli bought at a roadside market. Holding that cup, in a navy cardigan and an expression that could slice porcelain, sat my mother-in-law, Valeria Grant. Across from her, tossing throw blankets as if staging a home for strangers, was her younger daughter, Kira. They moved with the calm of people who believe the deed has the shape of their name. I knocked again, louder. Silence arranged itself into a lesson. A moment later, the door opened the width of a lie. Valeria filled the frame, posture elegant, smile neutral. "Nora," she said, as if we were meeting at a charity brunch, "you came back sooner than expected." "Why does my key not work?" I asked, each word ironed flat. She leaned against the frame like it belonged to her spine. "Because, dear, you do not live here anymore. Eli paid for this place. My son, not you." Air narrowed to a straw. "I am his wife," I said. "We bought the house together." She lifted one eyebrow, a gesture that always felt like a verdict. "You painted and you arranged. Eli provided." Behind her, Kira appeared with 2 of my stoneware plates, the ones with the hand-thrown rims. She glanced at me, unbothered. "You left the side door unlatched when you rushed to the hospital," she said. "We assumed you would want help." Laughter scraped up from my chest before I could lock it down. Not humor, survival. "What is funny?" Valeria asked, eyes narrowing. "You are pouring tea in a house you think belongs to you," I said quietly, "and you have no idea what you just stepped into." The smile on her mouth wavered for the first time. A candle caught in a draft. It lasted 1 beat. It was enough. I turned and walked back down the steps. My keys were useless, but they were not my only instrument. Eli had always said I could quiet a room without raising my voice. He had been right. He had also been more prepared for his mother than I realized. 2 years earlier, almost to the day, I sat on this porch beside Eli while winter light went thin at the edges. His startup had collapsed. The bank had swallowed his business account whole, and I had watched him trying to make his broad shoulders smaller, to fit inside a disappointment he did not deserve. "They might take the house, Nora," he had said, not quite looking at me. The next morning, I got dressed, braided my hair tight, and drove to Copper Harbor Credit Union. I refinanced, quietly, moving the mortgage into my name, using the emergency fund I had stitched together from night work and small victories. I took a freelance interiors contract through a friend, and made the payments through a checking account with only my signature on it. I kept receipts like prayer beads. I did not tell Eli. He was rebuilding breath by breath and did not need the humiliation of a rescue he did not ask for. I did not tell my parents. I certainly did not tell Valeria, who considered female competence a personal insult. After I left the house that morning, I drove past the bakery that would later save my worst afternoons and pulled into a motel that smelled like bleach and old carpet. I used the one card still open, checked into a room with loud plumbing, and sat on the bed, still in yesterday's jeans, still wearing the hospital wristband. I pressed Eli's last voicemail to my ear, his soft, sleepy voice saying, "Hold my place," and then I turned off my phone because grief requires dark. When the bells of St. Anselm chimed the hour, I called the funeral home. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "This is Nora Hale," I said. "I need 2 names removed from the list." The woman on the line did not ask why. She just said, "Of course," the way people speak when they have handled other families' weather. I did not sleep that night, but my hands stopped shaking by morning. On Tuesday, I circled the block and slipped through the alley behind the hydrangeas, where the fence leaned like an uncle after a party. The laundry room door had a latch that never liked to commit. Eli promised to fix it. He never did. I did not make a sound. Inside the house, lavender plugins fought the ghost of our coffee. My photos had been taken down. Art prints of winter barns I did not recognize hung in their place. I moved down the hall to the small room where Eli kept cords, drives, ideas, and the smell of cedar oil, the studio he called his circuit chapel. Valeria hated that room. She once named it a graveyard for junk. It had been spared her touch. Top drawer, receipts. Second drawer, business cards, USB drives labeled in Eli's neat block letters, a sticky note that read, "Cancel dentist," and another that read, "Fix gate." On the desk, wedged between 2 user manuals for devices I never understood, was a slim black folder. Across the top, in his handwriting, "Postnup, do not discard." We never had a prenup. We married later than our friends, with more love than furniture, and treated paperwork like an insult to trust. My hands startled but did not fumble. Inside, 3 typed pages on a local attorney's letterhead, dated 2 weeks after our 2nd anniversary. The language was precise and plain, the kind I can read even through a fog. In the event of the husband's death, all jointly held assets, including real property at the Linden Rise address, shall transfer entirely to the spouse, Nora Hale, unless superseded by a last will and testament. There was no will. There were signatures. There were witnesses. And at the back, tucked like a secret inside a secret, a page torn from a plain notebook. Eli's hand, unbuttoned and familiar. If you are reading this, something has gone wrong. If my mother tries to turn gravity off, show this to your lawyer. You know how she is. Keep this safe. Love, E. I sat in his chair and let the edges of the room stop spinning. Then I slid the folder inside my coat, left the way I came and closed the laundry door softly so the house would not wake. Back at the motel, I pressed the folder flat under a dictionary, because ritual helps even when no one else sees it. I made coffee that tasted like metal. I waited for sunrise. I called someone who had held my hair the night the dorm flooded, and argued with me politely the night I almost married the wrong man. "Angie," I said when she answered, "I need you in your sharpest suit." Angela Flores did not ask for context. She just said, "Tell me where to meet you. We will make this right." By Wednesday, the adrenaline had softened into a kind of purposeful quiet. I was halfway through spooning cold soup into a tense stomach when 3 sharp knocks landed on my motel door like punctuation. Through the thin curtain, I saw Valeria's silhouette and a man with a square jaw and a clipboard. I did not open the door. I took the folder in one hand, my phone in the other, and stepped outside to the sunless parking lot where the wind could take my breath if it wanted to and I would not give it. "Nora," Valeria said. "This is Mr. Carr, our family attorney. We are here to discuss next steps for the property." "Next steps," I repeated, not as a question. "We are not at a ribbon cutting." "Since Eli left no will," Mr. Carr began, "his estate defaults to division among next of kin. As his mother and sister, as his wife, I said. "The only spouse with a legal towel to dry the mess, I think you mean." I held up the black folder. Valeria's gaze slid to it like a moth to a porch light. Postnuptial agreement. Notarized, witnessed, stamped. Transfers all shared assets to me in the event of Eli's death. Dated and filed. There is no will to supersede it. "May I see it?" the attorney asked. "You will receive a certified copy through my counsel," I said, "whom I have already retained." Valeria's face did a small, satisfying thing, like porcelain under a temperature change. "You are bluffing," she said. "If I am," I answered, "you should feel free to bring in more velvet curtains." No one moved. A car in the next lane coughed to life and left. Mr. Carr took a professional step backward, as if distance could save him from a poor retainer choice. Valeria leaned in, voice low and sharp. "You were never one of us." "I was never your idea of us," I said. "That is different." Then I turned and went inside and locked the door twice. Through the curtain, I watched them stand there, doing the math. They left without ceremony because ceremony requires leverage. I put Eli's note on the motel nightstand and traced the curve of his E. Every grief has a hinge. That was mine. Not victory, not vengeance. Just the precise click of a boundary found and fastened. With the post-nup pressed like a passport inside my coat, I built a list on motel stationery. People forget lists are prayers in sensible shoes. At the top, Angela, real estate and probate. Then, funeral home, guest list. Then, locks, change. Then, utilities, confirm accounts in my name. My coffee cooled while ink warmed. I called Angela first. She listened, then took over the parts that required law. "Do not hand them anything directly," she said. "We send certified copies. We log everything. You do not text. You do not argue on porches. You do not perform grief for people who do not deserve a ticket." I could hear papers shifting as she built a wall with her hands. St. Anselm's bells were relentless that morning. 1 clear note per hour, church insisting time had not broken. I dressed in clean jeans and a sweater that had outlived 2 apartments and 1 dog. I ate toast without tasting it. I called the funeral home and said the sentence again. The woman there asked for the names, repeated them slowly, and then asked if I wanted to add anyone else. "Yes," I said, unexpected warmth in my throat. "Please add Angela Flores." After lunch, I returned to Linden Rise by the alley route. Valeria's car was not parked out front. The curtains were closed the way people close their eyes mid-argument. The laundry room latch lifted the way it always did for me, reluctantly and eventually. The house smelled like someone else's idea of clean. I walked past the couch and did not look at the pillows. I turned into Eli's studio and exhaled in a place that still remembered how we spoke. I gathered what the lawyer would need: the deed showing the refinance date, the mortgage confirmations addressed to me, the property tax receipts with my name spelled correctly, the insurance policy update Eli had initialed without looking because he trusted me to keep catastrophes from becoming hobbies. I scanned what I could with a phone app and sent the files to Angela with subject lines that began with exhibit instead of look at this. Language matters. Leaving the house took a second act of will. Every doorway was a goodbye. I did not touch the mug on Eli's side table. I did not open the drawer where he kept old love notes folded into origami cranes. The laundry door clicked behind me like an exit line. I did not stop to breathe until I reached the car. At the motel, I stacked copies, labeled envelopes, and tried to eat half a sandwich. Grief changes appetite the way a storm changes a plan. At twilight, 3 more knocks landed on my door, fast and rehearsed. I looked through the curtain expecting Valeria. Instead, a courier in a gray jacket held out a manila envelope with my name typed in the kind of font people think makes a thing official. County Probate. Notice of Petition. Inside, on crisp letterhead, Valeria's petition argued that Eli had signed under emotional duress and that I, his wife, had exercised undue influence. She wanted the postnup voided, the deed considered disputed, and the court to grant her temporary control of the property. I read the words twice. They landed not like a punch, but like a slow stone placed on my chest. I set the letter down, picked it up, read the date, filed 3 days after Eli died, and laughed once. A sound with no humor in it, only disgust. I called Angela. She let me read the sentence that broke me aloud. Undue influence, because speaking it took away some of its theater. "This is textbook when they have nothing else," she said. "It is noise. We will answer with proof. We will also ask the judge to make clear that breaking and entering is not a form of grieving." After we hung up, my phone buzzed with a number I had not saved on purpose. James Harding, Eli's former partner, had written, "Valeria contacted me asking for anything about Eli's mental state. I told her nothing. She mentioned one meeting where he seemed off. I remember it. He forgot where he parked. Stress, I figured. Heads up." The words pulled at a memory I had folded into a drawer 6 months earlier. One evening in late summer, Eli had come home glassy-eyed and pale. "Neurology appointment next week," he had said, making a joke about being too young to forget a grocery list. He told me not to worry. I had not gone. He insisted he could walk 2 blocks without a chaperone. We had agreed to talk about it if anything turned into a pattern. It had not. I tore apart the neat piles I had made on the motel bed until I found a stack of envelopes I had been ignoring since autumn. Property tax inserts, a coupon for a roof repair service, and a plain white envelope from St. Michael's Neurology Clinic. I opened it with the kind of care people reserve for museum glass. "Following your assessment, cognitive functions fall within normal range. No indicators of decline detected. Dated 3 months before the day the machines went quiet." Relief arrived so fast I had to sit down to catch it. Then anger. That slow, clean burn that says the fight will not devour you. It will fuel you. In the morning, I walked into Angela's office, carrying the black folder and the letter from St. Michael's, and the steadiness that comes when a person has evidence and refuses to hand it over with tears. Angela hugged me like she meant it, and then became my favorite instrument. Precise, relentless, kind about everything that did not need a knife. "We will file our response today," she said. "We will ask for dismissal. We will ask for a note in the record about the break-in. We will send a copy of the postnup to Mr. Carr with a cover letter that has no adjectives." The hearing date arrived on the county docket faster than I imagined bureaucracy could move. We sat at the respondent table under lights that made everyone look like paper. Across the aisle, Valeria wore black lace that photographed well and sorrow that did not. Kira sat beside her with her head bowed. Their attorney cradled a folder that looked too new to contain anything useful. The judge, a woman with silver hair and a face that said she had seen every version of this story and still bothered to sit up straight, asked for brief statements. Mr. Carr spoke of concern and confusion, of a son who had suffered stress and a wife who may have capitalized on it. He never said my name like an accusation. He did not have to. The courtroom knows how to hear women through the filter of men's discomfort. Angela stood, placed a copy of the notarized postnup on the clerk's desk, followed by the deed, followed by bank statements that showed the mortgage payments leaving my account like clockwork, followed by St. Michael's letter. She did not give a speech. She presented a timeline. When she finished, she said one line that silenced even the fluorescent lights. 3 months before his death, Mr. Hale's cognitive assessment came back normal. The judge read, looked over her glasses, and asked Mr. Carr for any medical documentation to the contrary. He did not have any. The judge ruled. Petition denied. Agreement upheld. Deed affirmed. The gavel found wood with an elegant thud that reached the small bones in my ears. I did not celebrate. I exhaled. Outside the courthouse, the sky had the audacity to be beautiful. I walked down the steps without looking for Valeria, but her heels found me like an old song. "You will not erase me," she said. "I am his mother." "You did that to yourself," I answered. "You erased the part of you he could still love when you tried to erase me." She stepped back. Not a retreat, a recalibration. You cannot keep me from his funeral. I already did, I said, and walked away because I have learned that not every truth requires an audience. The chapel where Eli's ashes would rest smelled like cedar polish and lilies. People filled the pews before noon, neighbors who had borrowed our drill and never returned it, colleagues who brought casseroles and shame about the timing, 2 teenagers from down the block who had learned to change a tire in our driveway. Angela sat near the front, not as counsel, but as witness. When the music inhaled before the first hymn, 2 shadows slid into the back pew, black hats, black sleeves, Valeria and Kira, uninvited. Angela turned, question in her eyes. I shook my head. My legs moved me down the aisle, heels loud and steady. You are not supposed to be here, I said quietly. Not today. I gave birth to him, Valeria said. And I carried him when he could not carry himself, I replied. I am the person he chose. She opened her mouth for a performance. Kira touched her sleeve, eyes fixed on the floor. Mom, she whispered, let's go. For the first time in a week, Valeria obeyed a sentence that was not her own. They left without ceremony. The door closed. The room exhaled. I turned toward the blue velvet cloth and the urn beneath it and said goodbye with both hands on the lectern and my voice under me like a foundation. I slept that night for the first time since the machines fell silent. Not deep, not long. Enough. The day after the funeral, the house sounded like a person waiting for news. Sunlight hit the kitchen sink in a stripe that used to catch Eli's wrist while he peeled oranges. I stood there in his college sweatshirt, holding a mug I had reheated 3 times, and watched the street where nothing was happening. Waiting becomes a habit. It wears grooves into the brain. Every engine in the distance sounds like a threat. An hour after dawn, a familiar car idled across from the house. Windows half down. Cigarette smoke. Valeria's profile. Chin up the way it goes up when she is about to use a noun like a weapon. She did not get out. She did not knock. She stationed herself like a monument to ownership and stared forward into a future she could not manage. I stepped onto the porch barefoot and met her gaze. I did not wave. I did not scowl. I drank my coffee like breathing. After a minute, she flicked the cigarette into an ashtray, started the car, and left. Not surrender. Reminder. She is not the first person who believed repetition is another word for power. For 3 days, she did not return. In those hours, I opened every drawer Eli had touched since we moved in. I lined up receipts along the edge of his desk and fed what was no longer needed into a shredder with the kind of gratitude you can feel in the wrists. I wore his watch and learned the particular quiet that arrives when a house allows a woman to take up the space she has already paid for. On the 3rd afternoon, I found Eli's gardening notebook behind the second-to-last row of books, tucked where he liked to store plans he believed in. He had filled it with graph paper layouts, seed lists, and doodles of marigolds with faces in the centers. On one page, taped to the top, a small packet of marigold seeds and a note in his sideways hand. For Nora, when you are ready to make the yard louder than sadness. I was not ready. I did it anyway. I took a shovel to the marked rectangle by the fence, turned the soil until the smell of earth rose like a second chance, and pressed seeds into the dark with thumb and forefinger, like punctuation for a sentence that had not yet arrived. I watered. I sat on the step. I let my shoulders drop from around my ears. For a whole hour, my brain did not draft a legal document in the background. When I went back to the front door, an envelope lay on the mat. No stamp, no handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 6 words in black block letters. This house will always be mine. The sentence wanted a stage. It would not get one. I laughed, gently, the way you laugh when a child announces they are taller than the moon. I carried the paper to the garden, dug a shallow grave at the corner where we had decided the trellis would go one day, and buried the letter under a fist of good soil. I pressed it down and whispered, "Compost." I watered it like anything else deserving of transformation. I returned to the kitchen and brewed tea with cinnamon, because Eli believed sweetness could teach sorrow its manners. On the table, I made a new list. Locks had already been changed. Utilities were quiet. Probate was closed except for signatures and one last formal letter. Work hovered, not as a necessity this week, but as a future I wanted to RSVP to. Spring arrived faster than the calendar approved. Shoots lifted their green punctuation through the soil. The rosemary in the kitchen found its ambition again. I painted the guest room a clear sage, took down Valeria's winter barn prints and hung photos of ordinary good days. Eli with flour on his shirt because he forgot the lid on the mixer. Our dog the summer before he left us. The blue lake we found when we took the wrong turn and decided it counted as a plan. I left one drawer in Eli's studio untouched, not as a shrine, but as respect for the corners of people we do not get to finish. I reopened my interior practice on purpose, small and exact. The first client was a widow who wanted her kitchen to stop accusing her of cooking like someone else. The second was a retired teacher who wanted a sunroom for orchids because she had finally decided flowers were not frivolous. The third was a young nurse who had left an engagement and needed her apartment to stop talking in his voice. I did not tell them the whole story. I listened. I designed. I brought samples and mercy. A week later, a small envelope arrived with a check from the funeral home marked Overpayment Refund and a card in tidy script. You handled a difficult crowd with grace. He would be proud. No signature. The handwriting was Kira's. I tucked the card into Eli's gardening notebook between marigolds and rosemary. One afternoon, Angela sat on my porch and drank lemonade like a woman who had cut a dragon down to size on a Tuesday. There will be an echo, she said. Sometimes people like your mother-in-law send little storms because they cannot accept that the last one did not knock you down. I planted the last one, I said, nodding toward the marigolds. It seems to be doing useful work. I do not pretend grief faded. It changed weight, changed room, learned to sit in the corner and read quietly while I worked. There were mornings when I reached for a voice and met air. There were nights when the clock sounded like a hallway. There were minutes that tasted like steel. And then there were the afternoons when the breeze lifted the chimes Eli insisted we hang, and the light fell on the kitchen table at an angle that whispered, "Keep going." Stepping into summer, I set a bench beneath the maple where Eli once promised to build a swing. I sit there now with dirt under my nails and breath in my ribs and say a sentence aloud because the wind knows how to keep a secret. I did not win by taking what you had, Valeria. I won by refusing to become less so you could feel like more. The marigolds disagreed about everything but sun. They made a loud border at the back fence, gold the color of stubborn joy. When I watered them at dusk, I sometimes heard Eli's laugh as if it had learned to live inside the leaves. The house stopped watching me for cracks and started holding me like furniture built right. On certain Sundays, a woman at the market with a bruised look in her palms would ask me what to do when someone believed politeness entitled them to your peace. I gave her a version of the only answer I trust. Lock the door. Make tea, collect receipts, plant something. It is not a metaphor. It is an instruction manual. The morning after the chapel, my body woke before the light, the way it does when it expects bad news. None arrived. Instead, the house held a steady hush. Not hostile anymore, simply waiting for instructions. I made tea with cinnamon, opened the back door, and stepped onto the porch to watch the first slice of sun climb over the maple. I remembered Valeria's idling car, the cigarette balanced like a threat on her fingertips, and felt a quiet decision settle into my bones. Boundary is not a speech. Boundary is logistics. I called the locksmith I trust because he hums while he works and never treats a woman's safety like theater. New keys, new deadbolts, new strike plates, I said. Front, back, laundry, garage, studio, the shed by the fence. Today. He arrived before 9, toolbox singing with metal. While he worked, I labeled spare keys with a pen that would not smear and tucked them into envelopes for the only two people who deserved access, Angela and Tessa, my oldest friend in the city. The locksmith installed reinforced plates that bit deep into the frame and showed me how the bolts seated into steel. "Try it," he said, stepping back. I locked the door and felt, for the first time in days, the clean click of something that obeyed me. He smiled. "That is the sound of a house choosing you." Next came paperwork. Angela had already filed for a protection order after the break-in and the unwanted appearance at the funeral. "We will ask for distance," she said, "and for the court to note that grief is not a permit for trespass." The hearing would be brief. The standard was clear. I collected every piece of it like a mason stacking bricks: service affidavits, the police report I filed after I found the letter on my mat, a printout of the postnup with the notary's seal, a photo of the velvet curtains I did not buy. The courthouse for protective orders lives in a side annex built with practicality instead of pride. Final chairs, a vending machine that eats quarters, and remorse. My case was called after a man who kept his hat on until the bailiff took it gently from his head. I rose, hands steady, jaw soft. Across the aisle, Valeria sat in a charcoal dress, her mouth arranged in sorrow. Kira was not with her. That felt like weather changing in a far field. The judge, who wore reading glasses low and authority high, listened. Angela spoke in short, exact sentences that did not overreach. She described the lock change. She submitted the photo of the funeral guest list and the chapel staffer's statement. She read the 6 black words from the letter and let them sit in the quiet, like an admission. Then she said the only line I needed. "My client seeks peace, not spectacle." Valeria's attorney tried a soft counter. "A mother wishes to grieve." The judge did not look up from the file. "A mother can grieve while she honors a court order," she said, and granted the petition with distances spelled out in feet and places spelled out by name. I thanked the judge out loud because a woman's gratitude for a working system should be recorded where the air can hold it. Outside, a local reporter lifted her phone toward me and asked for a comment. I gave her the most boring one I could craft. "Safety is not conflict," I said. "It is a right." She lowered the phone and said, "I will print that." That afternoon, I met with the estate clerk in a room that always smells faintly of dust and toner. We signed what needed signing. We initialed what needed initialing. We gave the county a copy of the postnup for their records because bureaucracy forgets unless you teach it to remember. When it was done, I walked home the long way through the market, past the baker who wraps loaves like gifts, past the florist who tucks extra rosemary into bouquets for widows without asking. At home, I opened the studio door and sat in Eli's chair with both feet on the ground. I pulled the black folder from the drawer where I had placed it after the hearing. I took out the notebook letter again and read the last line, "Keep this safe," like a call and response. "I did," I said softly. "I am." Then I returned it carefully and locked the drawer for the first time since he died. Neighbors began to orbit again. On trash day, Mr. Patel from 2 doors down rolled my bins to the curb and did not linger as if kindness were a debt. The 16-year-old who mows lawns in summer rang the bell and asked if I wanted the front hedge squared before graduation photos took over the block. The mother across the street dropped off a container of soup and a note with her phone number in case I needed someone to walk me to my car at night, not because I was afraid, but because sometimes company is architecture. I accepted all of it without apology. I have learned that refusing generosity is another way of starving. In the evening, Tessa arrived with lasagna and a deck of cards. We ate at the kitchen table under the good light and played a game we invented in college that rewards cleverness and punishes impatience. When she left, she placed her labeled key on the hook by the door as if she had always had it. The house noticed. I could feel it. Before bed, I stood at the back window and looked at the rectangle of dirt where the marigolds would be. The soil held a hidden letter from a woman who confused possession with love. Over it, new life would spell the opposite sentence. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. At the landing, I paused. The old fear rose. What if the locks do not hold? What if the door says yes to a hand I do not invite? Then I remembered the click, the judge's voice, the distance measured in feet, and the way the house had chosen me. I slept like someone who had not yet forgotten how. Grief rearranges a calendar. What used to be errands become rituals. What used to be rituals become work. On a cloudless Thursday, I found a cream envelope in the mailbox addressed in cursive that seemed to expect deference. Invitation. Informal reading of testamentary intent. The phrase made me laugh out loud on the porch. An informal reading is how people without standing try to invent one. Inside the envelope, a thick card summoned me to Valeria's home for a family discussion regarding Eli's wishes. The time was set for late afternoon, the hour that flatters people who believe light does not reveal what they prefer hidden. I forwarded a photo of the invitation to Angela. "Decline," she wrote. "No such process exists. If they have documents, they can submit them properly. If they want a scene, deny them an audience." I texted back, "I know," then sat on the steps and let my breath catch up. Part of me wanted to walk into Valeria's dining room, to sit at her glossy table and place the postnup between the roses as if it were a centerpiece. But theatrical victories do not feed a year. Instead, I turned to the work that does. I opened the cedar box where I had kept every crucial scrap the past 2 years and began a different reading. The story told by receipts. Mortgage statements with my name where his had once been. Confirmation emails for repairs I scheduled and paid for when his business account went dark. A list of every freelance job I took to make the payments more scared than smooth. I placed them in order, not to rehearse my righteousness, but to build a record that would outlast the inevitable rumor. I drove the stack to Angela's office and watched her scan each page into a system that names things so they cannot be misplaced. "They will try again," she said, not as warning, but as weather. "Sometimes with lawyers, sometimes with casseroles." She glanced at me over the top of the copier. "You do not have to accept either." On my way home, I stopped at St. Gabriel's to drop off a note for Nurse May, the one who squeezed my shoulder before she inducted me into a club no one wants to join. The chapel was empty except for a janitor humming a tune I did not recognize. I sat in a back pew and chose 3 sentences to say aloud to the air because my body needed to hear me. "Thank you for not breaking when I broke. I am not bargaining, I am building. I will keep choosing the quiet that holds." I did not attend Valeria's invented reading. I baked a pan of apple crisp and brought it to the neighbor who had returned our drill intact. We sat on his stoop while his twins chalked comets on the sidewalk, and we talked about sprinkler heads like it mattered. On the way back, my phone buzzed with a message from Kira. "I am sorry she keeps doing this. There is no will. She wants to talk through what Eli would have wanted. I cannot keep sitting at that table. Please tell me if you need me to say anything under oath." I stood still on the sidewalk and let the ache and the gratitude coexist without asking them to fight it out. At dusk, a different envelope slid under my door, this one thin and official. "Lien release. Mortgage satisfied." The refinance I shouldered 2 winters ago had crossed the line from balance to 0. I held the letter the way you hold a newborn you did not think you would meet. Careful, terrified, awed. I placed it beside the postnup, the neurologist's letter, and the court order. Together, they told the only story I wanted the county to remember. A woman did what needed doing, even when no one applauded, even when someone tried to change the locks on her life. The next morning, I took a cardboard banker's box to the studio and labeled it "Receipts of the Life We Built." I slid the key documents inside, followed by a photograph of Eli at the lake with wet hair, and the grin that once talked me into trying paddleboards, followed by the seed packet taped to the garden plan. On the lid, in heavy marker, I wrote a sentence I have never been more proud to make true. "If you need to prove where you belong, start here." On Saturday, I walked through the farmer's market in a plain dress with pockets and bought tomatoes from the woman who tells fortunes in seed catalogs, honey from the man whose bees prefer the neighbor's clover, and a bunch of daisies from a child with a handmade sign. Halfway down the lane, I felt eyes on me. Valeria stood by the artisan's soap booth, spine ironed, purse like a talisman on her arm. People parted around her without touching, the human version of the way ants steer around poison. Our gazes met once. She did not approach. I did not either. We were both practicing the order the judge had given us. It was the first time I saw compliance look like defeat on someone else's face. A street musician switched from an upbeat tune to a slow one meant for couples who had been married longer than grief. I stood under the trees and let the song comb the tangles from my thoughts. "You look taller," the florist said when I reached her stall. "New soil?" I smiled. "New locks," I answered. "Same roots, more sun." As a marriage, there is a moment right before a scene happens when the air changes temperature. On a late spring Saturday, the market smelled like strawberries and hot pavement. I had stopped to admire a set of hand-thrown bowls when a tight cluster of voices behind me turned sharp. I recognized Kira's tone first, low, placating, and then Valeria's, higher and brittle. "You will not speak to her," Valeria hissed, forgetting the way sound travels outdoors. "You will embarrass our family." Kira's reply was steady. "We embarrassed ourselves." I turned before I could decide not to. 20 paces away near the coffee cart, mother and daughter faced each other like two seasons refusing to give way. A few onlookers pretended to examine muffins while obviously staying for the show. I do not like shows. But I have learned that some humiliations end only when light lands on them. I walked over, not to accuse, but to be present. Valeria spotted me and straightened, as if fixing her posture could rearrange the truth. "Nora," she said, forced warmth over steel. "I did not know you would be here." The coffee vendor raised one eyebrow in a way that translated as, "Ma'am, please." "I live here," I said. "Market day is mine like everyone else's." Kira's eyes were bright with a kind of sadness that looks like courage halfway through its metamorphosis. "I told her to stop," she said simply. "She thinks winning requires an audience." Valeria's mouth trembled. "You are my daughter," she said. "You do not take her side." "I took the side of the law," Kira answered, "and the side of the person Eli chose." A few heads turned. The coffee vendor deliberately turned up the machine for a second to let steam whisper what she could not say out loud. "Wrap it up." I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth and decided on the sentence that would cost the least to say in public. "I do not want you ruined," I told Valeria, because it was the truth. "I want you gone." She flinched as if the word had teeth. "I am his mother," she tried again, softer now, pleading, aiming for weapon and missing. "I have nothing left." "You have your life," I said. "Stop trying to live in mine." Silence spread like shade. The market resumed, the way rooms do when everyone chooses not to dignify a spectacle. Valeria pressed her lips together until they lost their color, then turned and walked away, heels clicking too fast for dignity. Kira exhaled long, then shorter, like someone learning a new instrument. "Thank you for not turning that into a scene," she said. "I am not built for loud." "Neither am I," I answered. "I just learned how to be heard without shouting." She nodded. "There is something else," she added, voice dropping. "Mom told me she mailed you that note, the one that said the house would always be hers. I wanted you to know it did not come from me. I would never." "I know," I said, and meant it. She swallowed. "I have no interest in that house," she said, as if the building were a person who might take offense. "But I have an interest in not becoming her. If you ever need me to testify about anything, dates, conversations, who changed what, I will. I will ask if I need it," I said. "I will not if I do not." She smiled the smallest smile I had seen in months. That is all I wanted to hear. We bought coffee and stood in the shade talking about normal things, the art installation going up by the river, the stray cat that had decided 3 households in our neighborhood were responsible for its continued existence, the way grief makes you forget where you put your wallet, and then remember every unpleasant conversation you ever had in the cereal aisle. When we parted, she hugged me quickly, as if asking permission. I let the hug happen. On the way home, I ran into Nurse May on her day off, wearing sunglasses and the kind of hat that pretends to be a disguise. We chatted about the community clinic's new hours. She squeezed my hand at the end and said, "I like when the story lands where it belongs." I nodded, knowing she had seen families do worse to each other in quieter rooms. At home, the marigolds had begun to fatten, little fists of green promising color. I kneeled in the dirt to pull a line of weeds marching bold between the rows and found, under the loose, rich soil, a corner of paper the worms had not yet consumed. I knew what it was before I brushed it clean. The remains of Valeria's sentence. I laughed again, this time without bitterness. Not everything ugly deserves a bonfire. Some things deserve burial and the slow work of being remade into food. Inside, I set the market flowers in a jar, wiped the counter, and opened my laptop to a new inquiry in my inbox. A woman had written, "I am leaving a house that remembers too much. Can you help me make the next one remember me instead?" I replied, "Yes. We will choose colors that tell the truth and drawers that behave. We will change the locks on day 1. She sent back a crying emoji, and then 3 lines about the light in her new living room. Work, as it turns out, is one of the most effective forms of forgiveness. That evening, Angela stopped by with a folder and a bottle of something that was trying very hard to be champagne. 2 last signatures, she said, and then all that remains is time. I signed. We clinked mismatched glasses. We stepped onto the porch and watched the street go soft. "What will you do with the free space in your head now that it is not a courtroom?" she asked. "Fill it with plant names and fabric swatches," I said, "and with the names of women who will need a locksmith before they need a lawyer." She grinned. "I will keep a stack of your cards in my filing cabinet under preventative care." When she left, I sat on the back step and listened to wind move through the maple leaves like a woman practicing the same song until it became easy. The garden answered the only way a garden can, by growing louder. Later, sometime between dusk and the hour when good neighbors bring in their recycling bins, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I am sorry." 2 words, no signature. I did not need one. I typed back, "Live your life well, far from mine." Then I put the phone face down, locked the doors, click, 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 and went upstairs to a bed that smelled like clean sheets and not like fear. The flyer arrived rubber-banded to my mailbox. Neighborhood Association, Special Session. The topic line said, "Property Standards and Community Safety," which is how committees say we heard a rumor big enough to need cookies. I almost tossed it. Then I remembered Valeria's car idling across from my porch, and the way gossip likes to borrow respectable stationery. I circled the date. The community hall is a former dance studio with scuffed floors and a wall of mirrors that makes even calm people look like a crowd. Folding chairs scraped into rows. A table at the front held a bell that no one would dare ring, and a stack of agendas printed in a font that believed in rules. Mr. Patel nodded me toward a seat beside him. The twins from the stoop waved and whispered, wide-eyed at the novelty of seeing adults attempt order. The chairwoman called us to attention, cleared her throat, and introduced the first item, a complaint about recent disturbances on Linden Rise. The phrasing had been ironed. The eyes had not. Half the room glanced at me, then glanced away, the way people do when they want to be kind but also want to watch. A woman I barely knew stood and read from her phone with the solemnity of a witness. "It has been brought to my attention that a widow," she paused, tasted the word, continued, "has had ongoing confrontations with her late husband's family, including law enforcement and locksmiths." A small laugh rippled across the row of teenagers. She pressed on. "This may create an unsafe environment." The chairwoman thanked her, then looked around the room. "Comments?" she asked. The bell gleamed like a dare. I stood, not to perform, but because my spine prefers vertical when the truth needs a microphone. "My name is Nora Hale," I said, steady. "I live at number 31. the blue bungalow with the maple out front. A few people smiled, relieved to tie rumors to a porch they liked. My husband Eli died 1 week after New Year's. In the immediate days that followed, his mother and sister entered my home without permission. They changed my locks while I was arranging his funeral. The room made that soft collective sound humans make when another human's sentence lands where pain lives. I kept my voice even. I obtained a protective order. The court upheld my legal ownership of the house. The police responded once to document a letter slid under my door. I changed the locks, as any of you would. There have been no disturbances since. Someone in the back asked too loudly, "So no screaming matches?" The chairwoman shot them a look sharp enough to peel paint. I answered anyway. "No screaming," I said, "just boundaries." A hand went up near the mirror. Kira stood, small and certain. "I am the sister," she said, voice clear. "I participated in bad decisions I regret. I am complying with the order. If I have harmed anyone's feeling of safety, I apologize to the neighborhood as well as to Nora." The mirror multiplied her apology. It looked like an army of women learning a new skill. Mr. Patel raised his hand and did not wait to be called. "My wife and I live 2 doors down," he said. "We heard the locks click, then we slept better. That is my entire statement." Laughter returned to the room in a form that did not bite. The chairwoman tapped the bell once, delicately, as if to cleanse the air rather than scold it. "Thank you," she said. "The board reminds everyone that safety actions taken by a homeowner are not disturbances. They are prudence. We will update our newsletter to reflect community resources for grief and for legal aid." Meeting adjourned for cookies. People moved like water toward sugar. The woman with the phone approached me, cheeks pink. "I should have asked you first," she said. "I let the story get bigger than my questions." "Thank you for saying that," I answered. "I am not in the market for enemies. I was only in the market for locks." A man who teaches middle school science handed me a paper plate and said, "If you ever want a rain barrel workshop for your garden, my 8th graders do them for cost." I added his offer to the quiet list I keep in my head titled, "People Who Make a Place a Place." On the way out, the chairwoman squeezed my shoulder. "We printed the protective order clinic hours on the back of the agenda," she whispered. "My sister needed it last year. No one should have to dig for it." I flipped the paper. There it was, right under used book swap. It felt like civilization. Back home, I set the plate of cookies on the counter, tied on my apron, and sanded the kitchen drawer that always stuck. Eli used to threaten it with a screwdriver. I coaxed it with patience. When it slid smooth, I said out loud, "That's right," the way you talk to a dog who finally sits. Outside, the marigolds had begun to show tight green fists at their centers. They were practicing becoming loud. Grief shrinks and then expands. 2 mornings after the meeting, I woke with an idea fully formed the way bread dough rises while you are not looking. Eli's studio sat half-finished. Cords coiled, posters curling at the edges, a desk that remembered the weight of his elbows. I had cleaned, but not chosen. It was not a shrine, it was not yet mine. It wanted purpose. I carried a tape measure and a notebook into the room where the air still held the whisper of cedar oil. I measured the wall that faced the window. I drew rectangles where bookcases would go. I sketched a long table that could host fabric swatches and pie with equal seriousness. I planned a circle of mismatched chairs gathered by color instead of pedigree. I labeled an outlet lamp only because overhead lighting is for gyms and confessions. Then, I wrote an email to 10 women who had crossed my path in the last months. Nurse May, the florist with rosemary always tucked behind her ear, the baker whose bread arrives like mercy, the chairwoman who printed legal aid on an agenda, the retired shop teacher from 2 streets over who sews quilts with the precision of a machinist. Kira. Subject, room with enough chairs. Body, I am opening my studio on Thursday evenings. Bring work, questions, stubborn problems. We will not fix each other. We will offer the kind of help that fits in a tote bag. The first Thursday, 5 people came. We made tea and placed our phones face down. May brought forms the clinic wanted to reword so humans could understand them. We did it with kindness and with fewer syllables. The florist drafted a policy for deliveries that kept her staff safe after dark. We added a line about hot cocoa. Kira sat at the edge of the table for a long time, listening, then unrolled a list. "I do not want to become my mother," she said. "If anyone has a checklist for that, I will bake you a cake." We wrote a gentle, ruthless list together. Apologize without the word but. Honor other people's doors. Feed other people's pets when they are out of town. Learn what work looks like when no one claps. She laughed once. It sounded like relief. By week 3, 12 chairs were full. I added 2 stools. Someone brought scones. Someone else brought a hand-me-down laminator that made us lightheaded with the power to seal. On week 5, the retired shop teacher showed up with a box of safety goggles and announced we would be adding a mending night once a month. "Clothes and plans," she said. "Bring holes." The city has a way of finding rooms that behave. Word traveled without marketing. A teenager shy as birds began coming to sketch in the corner. She did not speak much. She did not need to. A man in his 70s, eyes kind, grief still fresh, asked if he could sit at the end of the table and write letters to his granddaughter who had moved 3 states away. We said yes and slid the good pens toward him. One evening, the director of the neighborhood shelter arrived with a folder. "Our dining room echoes," she said. "People with tender voices disappear in it." We measured the space, made fabric choices that forgave tomato sauce and heartache, and wrote a small grant together to cover acoustic panels disguised as art. When the check arrived, we framed the award letter not because of ego, but because survival deserves proof. Every Thursday ended the same way. We stood in a loose circle. We named one small, stubborn, good thing. The form now fits on 1 page. I walked past someone else's opinion and did not change speed. My marigolds survived hail because we tucked them under bowls like helmets. Then we washed the mugs, stacked the chairs, and left the room better than we found it. Eli would have liked that rule most of all. The studio softened. It remembered laughter. It learned to hold quiet without making it heavy. On the 7th week, a courier brought a padded mailer with no return address. Inside, a thumb drive and a note in a familiar, careful hand. Eli's college videos, film club archives. You might want them. V. The initials surprised me. The contents did not. On the drive, a younger Eli interviewed strangers about small kindnesses. The footage was shaky and perfect. I plugged in an old monitor and let his voice fill the studio while I spackled the last of the nail holes. When the credits rolled, I whispered, "Still good," and meant him and us and the room. That Saturday, the shelter held a thank you lunch for anyone who had ever delivered a tray, hung a curtain, or answered a midnight call. They asked me to say a few words. I kept them few. "We did not save anything," I said. "We made it easier for people to save themselves." The room clapped the kind of clap that is really a promise to show up again. After the lunch, I walked home along the river. Sun bounced off the water with the enthusiasm of bad stage lighting. A child in yellow boots stomped a puddle into mist. An older couple shared a bench and a thermos. The world had the audacity to be ordinary. I let it. At home, I opened the back door and the garden hit me with a scent as sure as a memory. The marigolds had burst, gold, orange, flame, a loud choir around the border. I knelt and pressed my hands into the dirt exactly where I had buried 6 block letters that once tried to scare me. The soil was soft as cake. I did not have to say anything to know what the garden was saying back. Summer taught the maple new tricks. The leaves threw bigger shadows. The wind found lower notes. On a Tuesday afternoon, hot enough to make the mailman swear softly on the walk, I found a cardboard box on my porch with my name written in careful school teacher cursive. No return address, no postal tape. The kind of box someone carries, not ships. I listened before I lifted the lid. The house made no warning sound. Inside, wrapped in tissue that had already lived one life, lay a baseball glove small enough to fit in a child's hand, a crayon drawing of a robot labeled Eli's Invincible Friend, a blue ribbon from a science fair with an honest second place printed in gold, a Polaroid of Valeria, younger, hair loose, holding a toddler with cheeks like summer peaches, and a note on lined paper. He kept these in the back of my hall closet. I should have offered them years ago. I did not know how to be a generous mother. I am learning how to be a decent old woman. V. I sat on the top step and let the box rest on my knees. I thought of the thumb drive, the videos, the return address that was really an initial. I thought of the apology at the market that she had not made, and the apology on paper she now had. I placed the glove on the porch rail, lined the photos on the step, and let the sun do what it does to paper, make it honest. The next day, the city paper published an obituary for Eli I had written in the small hours. Tight, true, free of the tempting poetry grief can use to sell itself. It named his work, his laugh, his gift for making strangers feel like they had just remembered your birthday. It did not name our legal battles. It did not say anything about locks. It said marigolds once made him cry because they looked like flame, and he liked the idea of fire that did not burn. That afternoon, the obituary's editor called. "We received a revised draft from your mother-in-law," she said carefully, "with additions." I braced. "We are not running it," the editor continued. "It reads like a resume. Yours reads like a person." I thanked her and hung up and sat very still at the kitchen table. Winning sometimes looks like a newspaper simply doing its job. That evening, my phone buzzed. A single text from a number I did not have to ask about anymore. "Thank you for writing him as he was." I typed, "He was easy to write." Then I added, "Because I am not in the business of co-signing fiction. We will not share a pew. We can share the truth." A week later, the shelter asked if they could plant a small memory garden near their side door for clients who needed a place to sit before making hard calls. I brought marigold seeds and rosemary cuttings. A man who had been sober 6 months dug the first hole. A woman who slept in her car the previous winter poured the first water. We wrote names on smooth stones and did not photograph them for socials because privacy is not a brand. On my way home, I stopped at St. Gabriel's to light a candle. Not because I believed a flame could carry messages, but because ritual makes my hands feel useful. As I stepped back into the heat, I saw Valeria sitting on the low wall by the steps. Not elegant, not armored, just a woman in a linen shirt, hands empty. She stood, hesitated, and then remained where she was. "I am not here to speak to you," she said, voice even. "The order stands. I am honoring it." I nodded and kept a polite distance that measured more than the mandated feet. After a moment, she looked toward the sky as if it might cooperate. "I was raised to believe control was love," she said. Not to me, not to herself, but into the air like a confession nobody asked to hear. I was wrong. I taught wrong. Her mouth twitched into something that was not a smile. If I had known how to do better, would I have? I do not know. She shook her head once, a small, unpracticed gesture. "I am sorry, Nora. There is nothing else I can say that would help you." "There is not," I said, "because truth is a kindness too. Live your life well, far from mine." She nodded, almost bowed to the candlestand, and walked away without a flourish, as if a wind had finally changed direction inside her, and she had learned how to lean. I went home to find 2 teenagers on my porch, not the twins, but friends of theirs, holding a broken wooden chair like a wounded animal. "We found this in the alley," one said. "Can you fix it or teach us how?" I opened the door and waved them in, because yes is what the studio was built for. We glued and clamped, we sanded and painted. We told them stories about furniture that outlives fear. When they left, the sun had dropped below the maple, throwing long shadows like ribbon. I took the small glove from the rail and placed it next to Eli's boxed origami cranes in the studio. I tucked the robot drawing into the frame with his lake photo so the two could share space. I slipped the second place ribbon over the corner of my room with enough chairs sign. People like to pretend winning is the only story worth saving. I know better. Later, I sat on the back step with a lemon cookie and watched the marigolds glow like tiny towns lit at dusk. I imagined a future inventory of this life. A house that learned to click for me and not for strangers. A studio that learned names. A box on a porch that arrived too late and still mattered. A woman who did not perform forgiveness but practiced peace. A garden grown from an insult and rain. Before bed, I wrote a short post for the community board. Nothing dramatic. If you need loaner tools for a lock change, I have them labeled and ready. If you need a witness for a protective order hearing, the Thursday room will organize a carpool. If you need a chair and a cup of tea while you make a list of what to do next, the porch light will be on. I clicked post and turned off the lamp. Upstairs, I locked the bedroom window because I like the sound of the latch and not because I do not feel safe. I lay down and watched tree shadow move across the ceiling. I did it, I said into the room that used to listen for breakage and now listens for sleep. No voice answered. The silence did, with the patience of something planted and grown to harvest. You did. You did. You did. By late summer, the marigolds shouted in full sentences, and the maple practiced shade like a profession. I thought the story had narrowed to ordinary, invoices, Thursday nights, locks that clicked and stayed clicked. Then a reporter from the city desk called. Not the gossip sort, the kind who still carries a notebook, who says their questions slowly like they are building a table you can set things on. I'm writing about post-loss property disputes, she said. Real guidance, not voyeurism. May I ask about your paperwork path? What worked, what you wish you knew? I almost declined out of reflex. Then I remembered the women on my porch pinching fear into fists the size of keys. You can ask, I said. I'll answer within my lane. We met at the studio table. She did not ask for a scene. She asked for steps. I showed her our binder, the one labeled Receipts of the Life We Built, and my unglamorous list. Refinance dates, notarizations, witness signatures, time-stamped photos of locks changed and letters slid under doors. A copy of the protective order with distances spelled in feet and sidewalks. Grief scrambles the brain, I told her, so I wrote my brain a map. She asked about the rumor economy. How did you manage the neighborhood narrative? I stopped feeding it, I said, and I handed the chairwoman a paragraph about safety clinics for the newsletter. The story ran a week later under a headline that sounded like a handrail rather than a trumpet. When grief meets paperwork, how to keep your home while your heart breaks. My name appeared once in the middle, small and unadorned. The rest of the column carried boring brilliance from caseworkers, legal aid clinics, locksmiths, and a county clerk who printed a checklist that could live on a refrigerator. I clipped the piece, not for a scrapbook, but for the corkboard in the studio. People need to see the stairs before they climb them. 2 mornings after the article, an envelope arrived from the city ombudsman's office with a memo stamped Draft for Review. Inside, a proposed policy requiring funeral homes and hospitals to offer a 1-page handout titled After Death Household Protections at the Time of Next of Kin Notifications. Plain language guidance on locks, utility accounts, safe document storage, and how to find a protective order clinic without scrolling until your eyes burn. The cover note read, "We adapted your steps. Remove your name if you like. We'll credit the Legal Aid Coalition." I wrote back the same day. Remove my name, credit the coalition. Make the font large enough for tired people. At the next Thursday session, we laid the draft on the table like a newborn and edited it with care. We replaced domicile with home, abode with address, and added a line near the top. You are allowed to refuse entry. You are not rude for doing so. The retired shop teacher brought a red pen and circled should until it turned into will. The florist added a box for emergency pet care contacts because grief forgets leashes. Nurse May rewrote the section on medication access the way angels would do it if angels spoke human. A month later, City Council passed the policy by enthusiastic voice vote at a meeting where I did not appear and my name did not matter. Funeral homes slipped the handout into folders like "Kindness You Can Keep." Hospitals added a link to their discharge pages. A friend texted me a photo of the flyer on a refrigerator next to a magnetic alphabet, 2 letters stolen to spell a toddler's name. Around the same time, the shelter hung our acoustic panels disguised as quilts, and crying softened from echo to breath. The teenager's repaired chair held steady by the front window. Small things clicked and held. Still, the past is a creature with good hearing. It listens for keys. On a Wednesday afternoon, an envelope from a law firm not mine appeared in the mail. Notice of intent to appeal. Valeria's signature lived at the bottom, tidy and determined. Angela called before I could. "Paper thunder," she said dryly. "There's nowhere to appeal to. The time expired. Consider it her last stamp. We'll file the polite dismissal and be done." I put the notice in the box marked receipts, because even lightning that never reaches the ground deserves a label. Then I went outside and deadheaded the marigolds, snapping spent blooms to make room for the next loud. "You had your turn," I told the wilted heads. "Now it's mine." That weekend, the city desk reporter returned with a bakery box and an apology for the intrusion. "Off the record," she said, setting croissants on the table. "Your handout is already traveling to 2 neighboring counties. The clerk called it the best kind of plagiarism." She hesitated. "Do you regret not going noisier? Some think you should have told the whole, juicy, court-ready tale." "I am not a cautionary fable," I said. "I am a room, and rooms don't shout. They open." She wrote the sentence in her notebook even though she said we were off the record. "For me," she said, tapping the page. "So I remember too." After she left, I went to the garden with a plate of crumbs and stared down the neat rows, listening to the hum that only arrives when something rooted decides to stay. A breeze plucked my hair and flipped it over my shoulder the way Eli used to do in the doorway, when I cooked badly and he thanked me anyway. "Appropriate credit," I said to no one, to him, to the dirt. Appropriate silence. The garden agreed by being beautiful and not making a speech about it. Autumn took the edge off the heat and gave the city its angles back. Leaves crisped. Air learned to behave. A letter arrived from the mayor's office, printed on paper thick enough to stand up by itself. Civic recognition for community contribution. They wanted to hand me a medal at a ceremony with cameras and a podium and adjectives. The list included firefighters, a school librarian who smuggled banned books into backpacks, a sanitation crew that saved a kitten from a storm drain. I admire every one of those people. I do not like podiums. I wrote a thank you and a no. Please give the medal to legal aid. They wrote the handout as much as I did. Or to the shelter's dining room staff, or to Mr. Patel, who rolls everyone's bins on windy nights. My contribution is furniture and paperwork. It's better in rooms than on stages. The mayor's aide called, baffled and polite. "Can we at least mention you?" she asked. "People like a person to look toward." "Put my name in small font at the bottom of the program," I said. "Then print the hotline for protective orders on the back." She laughed like relief. "Deal," she said. "Bring someone you love to the ceremony anyway. Seats are soft this year." I brought Tessa and Angela and sat between them with a lap full of tissues and a heart full of yes. We clapped until our hands stung for people who run toward fire and banish bureaucratic nonsense. Legal aid accepted a medal with humility. Mr. Patel refused to walk on stage until someone scolded him like a cousin and dragged him by the elbow. He waved once, sheepish, and the room loved him more for it. Afterward, a photographer asked for a photo of the woman who made the handout. I said, "Only if you include the whole coalition." He did. The picture ran in the community section next to a recipe for apple cobbler. Perfect. Back home, a package leaned against my front door. 2 iron bench arms and a bag of bolts. No note. The return address was a woodworking supply warehouse 1 town over. The manufacturer's label said Mapleview Model. I laughed, cried, and texted half the Thursday night list. Build day, I wrote. Saturday, bring wrenches. We assembled the bench under the maple while the street children pretended to be foremen, and the teenagers argued about the merits of hex keys. We sanded the cedar slats and sealed them with oil that smelled like a campfire's polite cousin. Kira tightened the last bolt with a look on her face I had never seen there before. Satisfaction unmarred by comparing. We bolted the bench to the ground because theft is real and permanence deserves a little help. When we finished, we sat. You would think a bench is simply a place to put your body, but it is also a sentence about who belongs. We wrote ours in full. Over the next weeks, I watched ordinary grace take a number and wait its turn on that bench. A man on a long walk finding his breath again. A woman practicing a hard conversation under her breath. A teenager sketching a shoe design that will one day be sold and scuffed and loved. In the morning, the bench wore dew. At night, it wore shadows. At all times, it wore our decision. On the first truly cold night, I hosted a soup dinner in the studio and made my favorite kind of mistake. Too much bread. People arrived with thermoses and stories and the certainty that we would not run out of chairs. Midway through, the chairwoman from the HOA cleared her throat. "I want to apologize publicly," she said, standing awkwardly with a spoon in her hand. "Not for anything specific. For everything general. For receiving rumor without interrogating it. For thinking civility is the same as safety." "No apologies required," I said, and meant it. "You printed the clinic number where people could find it. That is what repair looks like." Across the room, a hand lifted hesitantly. The city desk reporter stood in the doorway, unwieldy loaf of bread under her arm, face hopeful. "May I come in?" she asked, as if the yes might expire. "Always," I said, and someone took the bread while someone else found a bowl. Later, when the room had thinned to a few lingering dishwashers, Kira approached with a man I recognized only from a photo in Eli's college album. Film club president, now gray at the temples, smile recognizable. "He mailed the bench arms," Kira said, smiling small. "Found them in a salvage sale. Thought your porch needed a place for people to sit." "Correct," I said, shaking his hand like he had just replaced a beam in my roof. He told one story about Eli filming strangers dancing in a laundromat, and we laughed until the laughter hurt in good ways. When he left, I stood at the window and watched him cross the street, careful on the ice, umbrella up against a snow that had only just decided to take itself seriously. That night, in the quiet, I practiced something new, saying my own name out loud as if it were a place I could walk around in and recognize the furniture. "Nora Hale," I said to the ceiling, to the maple, to the locks that have learned my hand. The sound did not tremble. It did not apologize for volume. It fit. Winter committed. The maple surrendered its last leaf like a dignified bow. The bench wore frost and looked important. I bought salt in bulk the way the prudent do, and learned that shoveling a short walkway can feel like prayer with better cardio. December brought cards with glitter that migrated onto everything, including the cat I do not own, who visits anyway. Among the red envelopes and photos of babies in sweaters, one plain white envelope appeared, hand-delivered, tucked under the map. The handwriting belonged to someone who had learned neatness as a form of survival. Inside, a short letter. Nora, I will not contest again. I promise I did not know how to be good in time. I am learning too late for you. Please accept the enclosed as a practical apology. Use it for anything that makes you more yourself. V. Folded inside, a cashier's check for an amount that would solve problems I had already solved the slow way. I sat at the table and stared at the numbers. Money is a language. Sometimes it is a bribe. Sometimes it is a confession. Sometimes it is both. I poured tea and waited for my first answer to arrive, and when it did, it was clear. I would not cash it for myself. I would direct it like water toward roots that needed it. The next Thursday, I brought the check to the table. Tuition, someone suggested. Roof repairs fund, another said. Emergency locksmith pot, Tessa added, and we laughed because of course I would build that. We made a list. We argued. We voted with colored stickers like a benevolent kindergarten. In the end, we split it 3 ways. A new washer and dryer for the shelter. A standing account with the locksmith for anyone in the neighborhood who needed locks changed that very day. Tuition for 1 semester at community college for a teenager who comes to sketch and wants to study industrial design. I wrote to Valeria with the allocation and a receipt. Consider this the only use that helps me. She did not reply. She did not need to. On the year's shortest day, I hosted a small ceremony by the bench with thermoses of cocoa and stubborn candles that did their best. We wrote small, unsentimental notes to people who couldn't hear us and folded them into the cedar slats. Not to summon ghosts, to ground ourselves. To Eli, I wrote, for the note that told me to keep it safe. I thanked the paper aloud, and then the wood, and then the bolts. Snow came, quiet and thorough. The city desk reporter left a casserole on my steps with a note. For a day you do not want to cook. The chairwoman texted photo proof that the hotline number had been printed on the back of the new calendar. Mr. Patel's twins rang the bell and asked if they could decorate my bench. I said yes and watched them tie a ribbon so big it changed the bench's posture. On New Year's morning, I walked to St. Gabriel's with a pocket full of marigold seeds. The chapel was empty except for a custodian who nodded as if we had been meeting like this for years. I knelt, not in piety, but in gratitude for floors that allow knees. I did not ask for anything. I thanked the year for keeping what I could not have held alone. The judge's voice, the locksmith's hum, the newspaper's checklist, the coalition's flyer, the bench. When I stepped back into the bright cold, I found Kira waiting at a respectful distance. She lifted a hand, then let it fall, reminding herself without being told. "I won't come closer," she said with a small smile. "I just wanted to say, I enrolled. Spring semester, communications. I want to help people say things better so they don't blow up their lives trying to be heard." "Perfect," I said. And then, because my mouth has learned new skills, I added, "May your deadlines be reasonable and your professors decent." She laughed. "I'll keep you posted." She left a small paper bag on the low wall and walked away. Inside, a jar of marigold seeds labeled, "From your garden for other places." I held the jar like a lantern and felt the world tilt gently toward the light. That afternoon, I wrote one last letter for the year. Not to send, but to keep inside the receipts box for a day I might forget how this felt. Dear future me, you will love ordinary days more than you thought possible. Keep a spare key in a place only you know. Change whatever needs changing before anyone asks you to apologize for it. Call the locksmith early. Plant ridiculous numbers of marigolds. They understand. That night, the locks clicked, the heat hummed, and the house settled its bones like a happy animal. I turned off the porch light and went upstairs. At the bedroom door, I paused out of habit and listened. The quiet did not ask me to prove anything. It just was. I climbed into a bed that belonged to me in a room that answered to my name. Before sleep, I said the sentence I had been practicing all year. Now without drama, without proving. This is mine. The house did not correct me. The wind did not argue. The dark held still like a promise kept. Here is the inventory I promised myself I would make when the shouting stopped. One blue bungalow that remembers my footsteps and not my fear. One studio that turns strangers into neighbors and lists into policy. One bench bolted to a small patch of earth where people rest without permission slips. A flyer on refrigerators that says, in letters big enough for the exhausted, "You are allowed to lock your door." A locksmith who hums, and a judge who spoke like a level placed on a frame. A box of receipts that proves love looks like paperwork more often than movies admit. Marigolds, loud and numerous, rooted where a threat once lay flat. I did not lose myself to rage. I refused to trade peace for a performance of power. I accepted help, which felt like rebellion when I had been taught survival meant silence. I chose boring bravery, forms filled out correctly, boundaries measured in feet. 1,000 small decisions that add up to a life that answers when I call it mine. If you are listening to this because someone taught you to be polite while they took your keys, take this as permission from a stranger who has already changed the locks. You do not owe access to anyone who erases you. Put your name on the deed, on the utility bill, on the mailbox. Put your name on your own mouth and practice saying it until it fits. Plant something loud. Teach your hands to fix the drawer that sticks. Build a bench and bolt it down. You are not an anecdote to make other people feel superior. You are a room, open when you choose.